The following presentation will focus on local procedures for LPAC meetings held at the end of the year. Please be sure to listen to the audio, as some pieces of information are not written on the slides but are still crucial to know for this upcoming LPAC meeting. Which students will the LPAC review at the end of the year? Every student who is reflected in your school's LEP verification report via Teams as a monitored status year 1, year 2, or as limited English proficient will be reviewed by the LPAC at the end of the year. This includes the students who receive services as well and ELLs with special needs who can fall into any of the 3 categories mentioned. When your LPAC meeting is scheduled, be sure that the members required to attend have been communicated to be present. This is a table that reflects the membership composition divided by the level of support your campus is designated at. In some cases, where a special ed student will be discussed, due to the special exit criteria that was established earlier in the year in an LPAC, Jana Azarnak will also need to attend this end-of-year LPAC. So if your ELL special ed students were not eligible for special exit criteria, Ms. Jana Azarnak will not be required to attend your LPAC meeting. This slide represents all of the forms and data pieces required for the LPAC meetings targeting grades pre-K through 5th grade. The report card for the lower grades look different than for the upper grades. For students in pre-K through 1st, it will be important for the LPAC to determine if the student is making adequate progress for the year or is struggling. The report card grades cannot be used as the only source. Conversations will also need to incorporate data points from TELPAS, Stanford, and Texas Lake TPRI when determining if the student made adequate progress for the year. TELPAS scores, Stanford scores, and Texas Lake TPRI scores will need to be transposed to the LPAC annual checklist document. For 2nd through 5th grades, you will need to print the student grades, attendance, and discipline summary report from Teams for each student and staple it to their LPAC annual review checklist. You may highlight the areas in which the student had failed so that you can quickly review any failing grade for this semester during the LPAC meeting. Just like in your follow-up LPAC, the teachers will be required to submit their teacher feedback forms in AWARE for those areas in which the student failed. It will be important for the LPAC to determine if the student is making adequate progress for the year or is struggling. These can be downloaded using the form mass print feature. These documents will be reviewed by the LPAC offline, so please be sure all committee members can view the information, whether it is projected on a large screen or viewed on someone's laptop. Printing is optional, but not required. LPAC administrators. Again, these are the forms that you need to be auditing for completion and quality. You can use the form mass print option to review them quickly. As you plan ahead, you will need to think of the communication process between you and the teachers so that they may begin completing the forms and when their deadline will be for completion. Make sure to allow yourself to have enough time to spot check for completion and quality and time for those teachers to correct their feedback if need be. This slide represents all of the forms and data pieces required for LPAC meetings targeting middle school. Each student, whether they are served, parent denials, M1 or M2, will require an LPAC annual review checklist for middle school to serve as a cover page of the packet. Similar to the follow-up meetings we had at the end of the first semester, the student profile and AWARE will only be needed if the student failed any of the grading periods throughout the second semester. A failure report generated within Teams will quickly tell you which students failed during the semester. The student grades, attendance, and discipline summary report must be generated for each student and attached to the LPAC annual review checklist. Teacher feedback forms are required for 6th through 8th grades. They can be downloaded using the mass print feature. These documents will be reviewed by the LPAC offline, so please be sure all committee members can view the information whether it is projected on a large screen or viewed on someone's laptop. Printing is optional, but not required. STAR scores will be needed. Be sure that it's only from the first administration during the spring of 2015. This information will go on the LPAC annual review checklist and parental report on the student progress. TELPAS and IPT scores from spring 2015 administrations will need to be recorded on the LPAC annual review checklist and parental report on student progress documents. Journey's Lexile and RCT benchmark scores are required for all ELLs and secondary campuses who are in the Journeys class. Provide a Lexile map for easy reference to LPAC members when discussing the student's reading level. It will be important for the LPAC to determine if the student is making adequate progress for the year or is struggling. The report card grades cannot be used as the only source. Conversations will also need to incorporate data points from TELPAS, Stanford, STAR EOCs, as well as the Journeys Lexile and RCT scores when determining if the student made adequate progress for the year. This table reflects all of the forms and data pieces required for the LPAC meetings targeting high school. Each student, whether they are served, they are a parent denial, or they are M1 or M2, will require an LPAC annual review checklist, which will serve as the cover page of the packet. Again, similar to the follow-up meetings, the student profile and aware will only be needed if the student failed any of the grading periods throughout the second semester. You can use Teams to generate a failure report which will quickly tell you which students failed during the second semester. A student grades, attendance, and discipline summary report will also need to be generated for each student and attached to the LPAC annual review checklist. A teacher feedback form will also be required for 9th through 12th graders. These can be downloaded using the mass print feature. These documents will be reviewed by the LPAC, so please be sure all committee members can view the information whether it is projected on a large screen or viewed on someone's laptop. Printing is optional, but not required. The STAR scores will also be needed. Be sure that it's only from the first administration during the spring of 2015. This information will go on the LPAC annual review checklist and parental report on student progress. High school transcripts will also need to be generated for all students still classified as LEP. Reports will need to be attached to the LPAC annual review checklist for easy access to the information. TELPAS and IPT scores from the spring of 2015 administrations will need to be recorded on the LPAC annual review checklist and parental report on student progress documents. Journeys Lexile and RCT benchmark scores are required for all ELL students in secondary campuses who are in the Journeys class. Provide a Lexile map for easy reference for LPAC members when discussing the student's reading level. It will be important, again, for the LPAC to determine if the student is making adequate progress for the year or is struggling. We cannot use the report card grades as the only source. Our conversations will need to incorporate data points from TELPAS, IPT, STAR EOC scores, as well as the Journeys Lexile and RCT scores when determining if the student made adequate progress for the year. I've mentioned adequate progress in these past couple of slides. So what does that mean? Well, given the student's participation in bilingual ESL, or none of the above, is the student making progress towards exiting LEP status based on the appropriate timeline? Growth has to be incremental, which means it starts from year 1. Suppose a student is in his or her first year. We have information from the LPAC meeting when he or she was first issued LEP status And now we have spring test information along with grades. As an LPAC, you should be able to determine if the student has made progress. If not, then what is a campus going to decide to do about it for the next year? This is the purpose of the ELL Plan of Success, to determine what type of support a student needs to exit within the structured timeline. Although we have not activated plans of success for elementary, the conversations need to take place, and the LPAC meeting is the opportunity to do so. For some campuses, you have already set up your systems whereby these conversations already have taken place and a plan has been activated. If this is the case, go back and review those plans. What worked? What could be incorporated or abandoned for the next year? The LPAC Annual Review Checklist is required for all students. It does not matter if the student is monitored, a parent denial, or currently served. Each student receives the forms, and it should be the cover form stapled at the top of the packet. This is a form that will be signed by all LPAC members present at the meeting. The forms have changed since last year. The first change can be found at the very top, where you indicate the student's LEP status. We added checkboxes to eliminate handwriting and to make it pop out at first glance. The next change has to do with the types of services the student receives. ELLs participate in other program services, so we want to make sure that we are taking note of those items. It is not an option to leave those blank. The LPAC is limited as to what it can do relative to students who receive services from other programs, since collaboration is necessary. For example, we wouldn't want to recommend ESL Intermediate for a student entering middle school, assuming he or she will take the Journeys class, which means losing an elective, while the 504 committee has plans to provide Tier 3 dyslexia services, which could also mean the student loses out an elective. We have to work together to determine which need takes more precedence, Journeys or Tier 3 dyslexia. Imagine the confusion a counselor will have when trying to schedule the student. The next change has to do with the Stanford scoring table. Only use spring 2014 data if you collected it. If no test was administered, then you have to leave it blank. The STAR EOC table has also changed. You'll now need to indicate the score, test version, language of assessment, and whether the student received linguistic accommodations. Remember, you're only looking at linguistic accommodations. For example, if you have a student who was given extra time through 504 for reasons related to dyslexia, look through the LPAC paperwork from February. If that accommodation was classified as a 504 one, then it's not a linguistic accommodation. This is important because it affects the student's ability to exit from LEP status. The section titled Academic Progress contains 3 checkboxes to serve as reminders of what needs to be attached and or reviewed by the LPAC. This section has also been shortened. The Journeys Lexile and RCT information still remains. Students have to take the last benchmark and have the results recorded before it can be reviewed by the LPAC for the end of the year. There is a simple way to generate a campus report via vPort. If your ESL teachers need help, please contact your school's ESL strategist. So far, everything I've covered has to be pre-filled before the LPAC meeting except for the LPAC date. Moving on to the last section of the form, the last section, which is the table right above the signature lines, requires entries to be made at the actual LPAC meeting. The following slides will provide more in-depth information as we look at an annual review checklist form for elementary, middle school, and high school. The LPAC annual review checklist is required for all students, whether they are currently served, PD, M1, or M2. For elementary, your LPAC annual review checklist will be followed by elementary PK through 5. Please be sure that you download the correct form for your group of students. Be sure to also provide all of the information in the top section and that it is accurate, that the additional services the students are receiving are noted, test scores are provided both for IPT, TELPAS, and STAR. Be sure that your LPAC reviews the district assessment history, report cards reflecting attending information from the 5th and 6th 6 weeks, and Tejas Ley information. Within STAR, be sure to select yes or no as to whether the student had received linguistic accommodations. This would be an easy way for the LPAC to consider a student to exit even if they had advanced high ratings on TELPAS and met standard on the STAR. Be sure the LPAC reviews the appropriate documents for students at the elementary level. Within selecting the program types, besides completing the LEP status and the program type they are in, the last column indicates whether a student should be promoted to the next grade level or retained. Right below the option Retained for 5th graders only, the LPAC will need to make the recommendation of the level of ESL the student should be placed in for the following year. As mentioned before, the instructional accommodations are to be provided for the next year's teacher and LPAC, so that you can easily access those accommodations that were given to the student in the previous year. Another section that is only pertinent to elementary is a language of assessment recommendation for next school year. This section needs to be completed only for this year's 3rd and 4th grade students that took a STAR assessment this spring. This part is intended to inform the student's teacher next year what language of assessment and instruction they had the previous year and what language the student tends to respond better with. With this information, the teacher will be able to begin the next school year with an idea of how to best provide support to that student. So far, everything I've covered has to be pre-filled before the LPAC meeting except for the LPAC date. For middle school, the LPAC annual review checklist is required for all students as well, whether they are monitored, a parent denial, or currently being served. Each student receives a form and it should be the cover form at the top of the packet. This form will be signed by all LPAC members present at the meeting, as well as taking the place of the review and minutes. As mentioned before, you need to indicate the LEP status of the student, the services from other programs they are receiving, results from language-based tests and STAR EOC, the program types, and instructional accommodations given to the student in class. In the LPAC, you need to review the district assessment history and the report cards with attendance information reflecting the 5th and 6th 6 weeks. The Journeys, Lexile, and RCT information is a portion that's not anything new for the secondary campuses. Students have to take the last benchmark, and those results need to be recorded before it can be reviewed by the LPAC for the end of the year. There is a simple way to generate a campus report via vPort. If your ESL teachers need help, please contact your school's ESL strategist. Everything I've covered has to be pre-filled before the LPAC meeting, except for the LPAC date. For high school, the LPAC annual review checklist is required for all students, whether they are currently being served, they are parent denial, or they are in M1 or M2. Each student receives a form, and it should be the cover form at the top of the packet. This is a form that will be signed by all LPAC members present at the meeting and will take place of your review and minutes. Be sure to indicate the LEP status. Fill the top portion except for the LPAC date. Indicate the services from other programs. Include the results from language-based tests and STAR EOCs, Journeys, Lexile, and RCT. The LPAC must review the district assessment history, report cards with attendance information from the 5th 6 weeks, and the attached copy of the student's high school transcript for 9th through 12th grades. Everything I've covered has to be pre-filled before the LPAC meeting, again, except for the LPAC date. Moving on to the last section of the form, which is the table right above the signature lines, requires entries to be made at the actual LPAC meeting. This section of the annual review checklist is new this year. As the plans of success are a new initiative, this is their first year of implementation. Elementary has many components. The ELL component was held back due to the RTI paperwork process, which is currently being revised. Although a district committee is working on the RTI piece, we are committed to provide teachers with accommodations that can be applied as of the first day of school. Once the LPAC online system is finalized, the information will be available at a later date. These accommodations take care of the affective, cognitive, and linguistic areas and are also aligned to the TELPAS, ELPS, STAR, and good instructional practices for ELLs. We are not seeking for the teacher to select 10 choices, but rather for the teacher to provide feedback for the next year's teacher. The next section addresses grades 3 through 12, specifically for students who can potentially exit from LEP status. Be sure to administer the listening and speaking portion of the IPT English Language Proficiency Test. Keep in mind that for grades 3, 5, 6, and 8, they must have a TELPAS writing score of Advanced High to be eligible to exit. Students in grades 4 and 7 must pass the writing in STAR. For high school, grades 9 and 10 who met level 2 or level 3 on the English 1 or English 2 EOC in STAR writing. So look at the ELLs with TELPAS writing of Advanced and Advanced High. Also, refer to the local policy for required length in bilingual versus ESL program participation, since it also affects exit eligibility. The deadline for IPT testing is May 15th. Remember in November how you met with the LPAC to review ELLs with special needs? The documentation filled out will now need to be reviewed for the end-of-year LPAC meetings. Generate a report from teams reflecting all of your ELLs and special ed program. It's the same report you ran in November. Also, look at your LPAC review in minutes. You should be able to identify which students are required to satisfy the general exit criteria or special exit criteria. If you can't remember the difference, then review your notes from the legal update in October, when this was explained in detail. Keep in mind you have to account for all of your ELLs. Some of you have had students who enrolled from other campuses since November who were subject to the special exit criteria. So please take the time to review their LPAC folder. If you need more information on the student who transferred, then contact the LPAC administrator or lead teacher from the previous campus. Once you have your documents organized, you'll need to review the ELL's approved exit criteria in order to administer the correct version of the Stanford Listening Speaking Test. Refer to the student's LPAC folder or review in minutes. Some students may even be exempt depending on his or her disability. Take the time to verify the student's exit criteria for writing. Some may require to use TELPAS or Stanford writing results or may actually be exempt. Be sure to schedule a special ed ARD facilitator or diagnostician to be present at the end of year LPAC. Ask them to verify that the special exit criteria was presented by an LPAC member and approved by the ARD committee, or that an ARD amendment is on record that honors the special exit criteria. If no evidence exists in the R documentation with a date prior to the STAR and TELPAS administration, then the special exit criteria is invalid, and the state's general exit criteria must be upheld. Please note, if a student was dismissed from special ed services after the special exit criteria was developed, then the student is required to meet the state's general exit criteria. All campuses will receive self-adhesive labels for the LPAC folder of each student under review. Prior to the LPAC meeting, the following information needs to be pre-filled on the label: TELPAS 2015 ratings, IPT English Language Proficiency scores, Spring 2015 scores only, if applicable, and STAR EOC scores. Please be sure to not insert the LPAC date on any label. The sections that need to be pre-filled are circled. This includes the student's information, TELPAS STAR, EOC, and IPT scores. In the next chapter of our e-course, we will give scenarios so that the bottom portions of the labels are properly filled out during the LPAC meeting. In past audits, these three forms were not included in the student's LPAC folder. Be sure that your students for the end of year LPAC do contain these three forms in addition to the other required forms. The first one is a parental report on student progress. It is required by law to send to the parent of every ELL, including monitored students. This parent communication can be sent home with a final report card, but keep a copy inside the student's LPAC folder. The second form is a notification of exit from Limited English Proficient. Send the original copy to the parent for a signature, but keep a copy inside the student's LPAC folder until you have received the version containing the parent's signature. The third form is a compliance documentation. Using the same one that is included in the student's folder, fill out the information appropriate to follow-ups and notification of exit from bilingual ESL programs. Do this at the actual LPAC meeting. Time-saving tips for the LPAC meeting. A little goes a long way. Test students who could possibly exit during April and May. Assessments can be administered during ESL instructional time in bilingual classrooms. Create a safe test environment to lower the student's affective filter and test anxiety. Team effort. Hold LPAC prep sessions with all bilingual and ESL teachers and professional staff who can help with the paperwork. As the lead teacher, you can coordinate or delegate as necessary with the approval of your LPAC administrator or campus principal. The lead bilingual or ESL teacher can establish local deadlines to review the collection, accuracy, and completion of required documents prior to the LPAC meeting. Even though others may help prepare the documents, the lead bilingual ESL teacher is ultimately responsible for accuracy and completion of required forms. Network. Network with other lead bilingual ESL teachers. There are time-saving strategies used by different folks that you may find beneficial. When do students qualify to exit the limited English proficiency status? This slide includes information to answer that question. With a transitional bilingual or late exit program model, a student enrolled in a transitional bilingual late exit program is eligible to exit the program no earlier than 6 years or later than 7 years after the student enrolls in school. Elementary school exit scenarios. If the student enrolls in pre-K and is now in 4th grade, the student is eligible to exit. They have been enrolled in school for 6 years. For a kindergartner who is now in 4th grade, is not eligible to exit because they would be enrolled for 5 years. 1st grade, who is now in 5th grade, would also not be eligible to exit because they also have only been enrolled in school for 5 years. The rule of thumb is count 6 years from when students enrolled, and that will determine what grade level the student is eligible to exit the bilingual program. This slide reflects the exit criteria for students who are in the bilingual program. For a 4th grader, if eligible and they have been enrolled for 6 years, the exit criteria is as follows: a fluent English speaking score in the Oral Language Proficiency Test in English, IPT. Star Reading English, a Level 2, Satisfactory Academic Performance or above. Star Writing English, Level 2, also Satisfactory Academic Performance or above. Subjective Teacher Evaluation, Samples of Work, Classroom Observations, Anecdotal Records, etc. For a 5th grader, if eligible, who has been enrolled for 6 years in school, a fluent English speaking score in the Oral Language Proficiency Test in English, IPT. Star Reading English, a Level 2 Satisfactory Academic Performance or above. Written Proficiency in English, TELPAS Writing, Advanced High. Subjective Teacher Evaluation, Samples of Work, Classroom Observations, Anecdotal Records, etc. When do students qualify to exit the ESL program? No earlier than 2 years or later than 5 years after the student enrolls in school. A student must be in the 3rd grade or higher with STAR EOC Reading 2015 results. ELLs who receive linguistic accommodations on the Reading or Writing STAR EOC as a result from the LPAC meetings in early spring are not eligible for exiting LEP status. Remember, parent denials were never eligible for linguistic accommodations for STAR or EOCs. The following reflects the exit criteria for an ESL content and pullout. For grades 3 through 8th, a student who is at least in their 2nd year of enrollment in an ESL program, their exit criteria is as follows. They have scored a fluent English speaking score, FES, score in their IPT English Language Proficiency Test. They have met a Level 2 or 3 in their STAR Reading for their reading proficiency in English. They have met Level 2 or 3 in their STAR Writing for 4th and 7th graders as their written proficiency in English. For 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 8th graders who have attained an advanced high in their TELPAS Writing as their written proficiency in English. Subjective teacher evaluations may also play in part. For grades 9 through 12th, a student who has at least been in their 2nd year of enrollment in ESL program, who has scored a fluent English speaking score in their IPT English Language Proficiency Test. For STAR EOC students reading and writing proficiency in English, has met a Level 2 or 3 in their English 1 EOC or a Level 2 or 3 in their English 2 EOC. Subjective teacher evaluations may also play a part. This slide reflects the exit criteria for parent denials. The LPAC must review students' TELPAS and state assessment scores at the end of each year. Once the student meets exit criteria, he or she is reclassified as non-LEP and PEIMS. Students with parent denials are also monitored for 2 additional years. Notification of exit from LEP status form. This form is required to be sent to the parent when the LPAC has officially recommended exit from LEP status and transition into M1 status for next year. We removed exit from bilingual ESL program since this was also sent to parent denials. We also removed the verbiage found in forms from past years that stated something to the effect of, if no response is received by blank date, then it will be assumed you give permission to exit your child. As you recall, last May, TEA changed this procedure. We can no longer use it. We have to obtain parental consent, and there are no exceptions for this. A copy of this form must be kept inside the LPAC folder once it has been filled out and signed by the administrator. The copy must remain in the folder until the signed copy is returned by the parent. No one will be coded as M1 without parental consent. No one can exit the bilingual or ESL program until parental consent is obtained. The back side of the notification of exit from LEP status form must be completed. Parental consent for exit from LEP status can be obtained via the signed document or verbally. The area shaded in yellow must be filled out. If more than one attempt has to be made to receive parental consent, it must be documented on the back side of the exit letter. Once consent is obtained, whether signed or verbal, scan and email the backside to Ms. Carrasco at the Bilingual ESL department so that PEIMS can be updated. LPAC administrators. The deadline for completion is June 10th. This should be completed before leaving for the summer. Secondary campuses rely on this information for scheduling purposes. In the third chapter of our e-course, we will discuss the end-of-year procedures for the LPAC administrators. This concludes the end-of-year legal update.